What we asked ZGF to do with this project was to be able to grow that airport terminal so that it could accommodate the future growth that we were going to see in passenger traffic, and yet still keep the heart and soul of what we have in that building.
I think that this is going to be really the future of what airports should be. They should reflect the culture. They should reflect who the people are that live here. For people that are visiting here for the first time, it should be a wonderful gateway to this environment.
So out of the 3.3 million board feet that we ended up sourcing for the project, it all came from within 300 miles of the project site. And 1 million board feet of that wood can be tracked back to the force of origin.
The Portland Airport shows that you can build in place, have a really low carbon footprint, keeping existing infrastructure along the way, save money, and do it beautifully.
Welcome to Abodo CPT webinar series. It's great to have you with us. This is designed for a community of architects like yourself, construction professionals, architectural designers, anybody interested in circularity, sustainability, doing good for the planet, obviously stored carbon, timber, so on and so forth. It's great to have you with us for this CPT experience. My name is DK. I'm going to be your MC for today. I have that honor. I'm really excited today because we're going to be talking to someone who's had their hand, as you just saw for the video, in one of the most amazing kind of spaces I've ever been in the last couple of years. And I was lucky to be there at the end of last year, that beautiful Portland terminal over in Oregon in the United States. So welcome here. We got a brilliant speaker coming up and an even better live Q&A with her as well. I'm going to run through some housekeeping before we get into it and then cover off some of the details around the webinar you're about to experience. The first thing is that we're using a platform called Livestorm. If it's working for you, just carry on. If it's not, maybe refresh, maybe jump over to a Chrome browser. That usually works, but if it's working for you, fantastic. One thing to highlight in the platform we're using is the chat functionality. You'll find that on the side of the screen that you're watching right now. Please utilize that for any questions, any comments, any thoughts, any ideas, any links that you want to drop in throughout this discussion and presentation. We really encourage some live interaction with your good selves, and you'll find Jay there, Janelle, looking after you in the chat room. She's from Abodo, and you can see her contact details there, even if you want any more information about Abodo. But I just want to highlight that there's 499 people registered for today's webinar series. We nearly broke the 500. So please just drop into the chat right now who you are, who you're representing, if you want to go that way, or just where you are in the world and what you're looking forward to, what you're doubly interested in. As mentioned as well, we got a live Q&A. Someone's going to be taking that, not myself. So again, ask any questions, but be aware that we got someone very technical and very knowledgeable asking questions on your behalf. So we'll probably be covering off a lot of information there. I also need to tell you about the CPD side of this, continual professional development side of this in terms of the points. So as part of this session, which is brought to you by TULO, which is the accreditation professional development platform for architects, designers, and the architectural industries, that we're going to accrue some points. So you will be emailed a certificate after this seminar for those who are attending with those details regarding the session and where it's going to be loaded up on your TULO CPD platform. So hopefully that covers off all the things. Other than say, if you need any further information, hit Jay up on the chat, any technical issues, any things going wrong, anything, insights as well going forward you want to share, please hit up Jay. She's very open and she'll be there also to answer any Abodo related issues / questions / inquiries as well. So you can find her there. In terms of just everything else, I think we're covered. Grab your favorite notebook, your beverage. We're going to have a presentation, then a lively Q&A afterwards, and then I'll be back to kind of wrap up this series. As I mentioned, we've got a professional doing the Q&A rather than my good self. I say that with great grace. We have Steve Napier. So let me give Steve an introduction, then I'll introduce you to your main keynote. So Steve is going to drop in after the keynote presentation for the Q&A. And Steve is the Business Development Manager in Australia for Abodo. Abodo and has over 16 years experience in timber sales. He brings a deep knowledge across all major timber species and key coating systems, all available in the market. He's had the privilege of working alongside some of Australia's most respected architects, contributing to the detailing and specification of feature timber in high-profile projects. His passion lies in creating long-term practical solutions that enhance timber performance and aesthetics. He's enthusiastic, he's detail-orientated, and committed to helping clients get the most out of their timber choices. Now, Steve is going to follow up with Q&As for our keynoter. So let me introduce our wonderful keynoter we have here today. We have Rena Simon. She's a designer of many facets, part storyteller, part artist, part innovator. She intentionally delves into the heart of the client's missions and cultures to find the right solution. Her deep appreciation of the natural world served as her inspiration in connecting conceptual architectural ideas to the greater aspirations of her clients. Her calm, intentional leadership is demonstrated in her resolute commitment to tackling any design problem and knack for motivating and mentoring younger designers as well. She's a principal at ZGF Architects, and it's great to have you with us, Rena, and the digital stage is all yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that intro. So today, I'd like to share a story of our design process told through a series of architectural models and how we use those and used scale, light, and craft to create something very local for Portland. This was the main ask that the Port of Portland asked us when it came time to completely revamp their terminal. They asked us to keep it intimate, have it reflect the region, and keep it local. And so our biggest challenge with that was the scale. We're taking something that the community really likes. It's very intimate, and we're going to more than double it in size. So, if we've got this giant space, how do we start to create intimacy? We're also building over several decades of miscellaneous structures too. So how do we navigate all the functions down below that still have to work every day for the airport? So we started by looking to Portland itself as an inspiration around scale. Portland is known for its very small block size, and overlaying those blocks on the airport here, you can see we can fit about 10 of those city blocks in the new terminal footprint. And Portland's a city known for its parks and also its streets. So this served as an approach to take with creating a series of rooms and a series of streetscapes that providing pocket parks for people, just simply providing places for people to sit, whether they're coming out of a security and to put their shoes on, or they just want to grab a bite to eat. Because unfortunately, a lot of airports these days create what I would call a forced shopping experience. And two of the diagrams on this page are international airports, and one is actually, I won't say which one, but one is a cattle chute designed by Temple Grandin. So the port did not want to do that. They wanted to really prioritize the passenger experience and not force people to be in the duty-free lanes. And so we developed this much looser organization of space that's really an environment of choice. And by breaking that large space up into these smaller rooms, we started to create some of that intimacy. And throughout this presentation, I'll just kind of pepper in a few thoughts on models. obviously a big model advocate, but when your team is 25 people, at one point we were up to about 75 people just in our own office. You need a way to build consensus, and models are a great way to do that. They provide a focal point or a focus without trying to figure everything out. So this very scrappy model was kind of that turning point on this fundamental organization of a series of rooms. And so we were starting to shape those rooms from below, but then the next question was, how would we shape those from above? And the concept came about of this walk in the forest. How could we create this sensory experience of a walk in the forest? And dappled light is kind of an obvious choice. But what we found is just simply puncturing the surface of the roof didn't do everything that we hoped it would. It really starts to create a lot of contrast and glare. And so we started to think about surface light and how can you increase perception of light. And really you need a surface to be washed with light. Regardless of foot candles, a lot of it comes down to perception. And so how could we increase that perception? And then how could we ask the structure to create that surface? And just another model tangent here. Excuse me. Models create artifacts. They kind of live beyond the life of their project. And as you can tell, these models, this is not where the final design ended up. But 4 years later, this model informed a design idea for actually a facade for a project that we did or working on in Barcelona. So just there's something about models as an artifact that let ideas linger. So the challenge with this approach, this kind of structure as surface, is we felt like it was still a one-directional experience. And this airport is kind of a big H shape. If you imagine concourses kind of in bars off on either side of the page, you're going to come through ticketing and then you're either going to go right or you're going to go left. And depending on the time of day, you might get this wonderful play of light, but going the other direction, you're just looking at the more shadowed side of things. So we really started to think about what could create that multi-directionality. And so this is where arcing the space and also starting to gather the light, like you would with a basket, came about. And so we started looking at traditional Pacific Northwest basketry techniques. And baskets are beautiful, but they're also very functional. And it's taking this abundant local resource and assembling these many small parts into something that's both strong and powerful. And so there was a lot of development on just how we would create these layers of the basket and ultimately create a light basket that created what I would call a spatial light. And it's the kind of light that you feel like even on a cloudy day, when you walk into the forest and there's a bit of a clearing, that light is powerful. And then this would be a light that you could experience from any direction, wherever you were walking in the terminal. And then something else that models do is they give clients a bit of an imagination about what the space could be without trying to solve everything. There's a lot of pressure early on in projects to create renderings way before the full idea is really developed. And so there's a flexibility in models. And then, of course, models are also very messy. But at this point, we jumped in scale and started using a heliodon at the University of Oregon's local lab to look at how light would move through the space throughout the day. And this allowed us to really tune the light more and discover more of the detail about how we might contain that light a little bit. And so, of course, models, as long as we're building for a physical world, building physical things really helps us understand daylight. And so these rooms, we basically started tuning the light for each of these rooms. So in the ticketing, there were a lot of concerns around glare. So that in this location, that light basket is the most protected by that lattice, all of those 3 by 6 members marching across the roof. So it's the most sheltered. And then you get to the Oregon market, and Portland really wanted to have kind of a set of concessions that you didn't have to have a ticket to enjoy them, and people do. They just come here and have lunch, regardless of if they have a ticket. And so this is kind of celebrating that Oregon market space before you turn left and right and go through security. And then the 2 ends of the building, bringing in that maximal amount of light to balance the glare that might come from that exterior glazing. And so this completed the room for us, having the rooms coming up from below, and then these arched forms breaking down that scale further from above. And Oregon is timber. It's very much around us, and so there's a history of craft. There's also a history of longspan. There was early resistance to the idea of the airport being an all-wood roof. But simply going back in time a little bit, we were able to demonstrate that it's not really that far-fetched. And there's things that we can do with form too to be more efficient with the shapes that wood can provide. And the other really big challenge that we had with this, of course, keeping everything operational down below with the baggage handling systems, but then also not being allowed to use a crane to lift any of this into place. And so together with our structural engineers, we developed this approach of launching the roof out over the top of existing. And we broke it down into a series of cassettes. So this set up a framework for us to move these elements out into space. And here again, models, you can touch them, you can hold them in your hand. And so there's a great deal of communication. And this poor little tattered model was used in almost every meeting with consultants and the contractor to show how these cassettes could simply be launched out across the space and avoid all of those challenges with the crane. And there was about a 4-hour window in the morning, early morning hours, to be able to do this. And so we ended up not having to do those 10-foot cassettes that you saw, but actually each 100-foot by 150-foot bay, and I think there's about 16 of those on the whole project, could be created low to the ground, so it's easy to access out in the fab yard. And actually the fab yard was the airfield. And so then after those cassettes were built in kind of true Star Wars fashion, these were then wheeled about over to the terminal and pushed into place. So there's about 400 glue lambs on this project, and there was a lot of iterations that we did on the form. Very fluid, and then becoming a bit more restrained, but going back and forth between the computer and then kind of creating these physical proof of concept models really helped. And when we started to distill, what these beam profiles would be kind of came about from this other rather scrappy model, just some strips of paper draped over this light basket. We really found the simplification of those glue lamp shapes and went from 55 different profiles down to just 7 for those 400 beams. So these could be very repeatable, and they were fabricated here locally. The beams themselves are about 80 feet long and have a rise of about 12 feet in the peak of those domes. And then this was kind of our proof of concept of those beam shapes and how they would then accept that lattice work below. But then the other significant challenge with the project is that we had to prepare for the eventual Cascadia subduction front, which meant the entire 9-acre roof would need to move 2 feet in any direction in a significant seismic event. And so the structure needed to be resilient. It's a key piece of any of those emergency efforts. And so this mass plywood diaphragm had a big role in creating that stability for that 9 acres to move together. And this is actually one of my favorite series of photos here. These are some of our gals in the model shop, some of which are 2nd generation or 3rd generation model makers. But, how are you going to take a flat sheet of plywood, really thick plywood, about 4 inches, and bend that over a double curved surface? So here again, this is kind of our first step to kind of bring the contractor along. Yes, we can do this. And then they also did a little bit of that practice themselves at full scale in a warehouse here in Portland. So, a lot of back and forth of hand to computer. And, using the model to really hone the concept, the approach, have those kind of moments of innovation, and then using the computer to refine the shape. So simply just nipping and tucking on these plywood panels, a little bit of an angular cut here and there, we were able to get all those double curved surfaces to work out. And then coming here with these kind of wood sand dunes of those forms as seen from above. And then there's over 35,000 pieces of lattice, is what we refer to, the light baskets, and then just the continual kind of flat lattice outside of those light baskets below. But just simply creating that adding that lattice work, it starts to create a bit of an ephemeral surface, but it's still very soft. And we've got a very soft light here in Portland. And so we were starting to look for definition. How can we refine that shape? And I think there's a bit of a misconception about models in the architectural profession, in that they take a lot of time. It can be true, obviously, but they can also take just 5 minutes. And going back to that communication, it can establish a goal, again, without necessarily solving for everything. But it was kind of comical how long this solution eluded us. We tried all kinds of patterns, and now how are we going to define that edge? We looked at making a gap here. And here's where the serendipity of models comes through. Just, one night, stepping into the model shop and picking up some scraps. There's this, just if we say here in the U.S., if it was a bear, it would have bit me. Just simply offsetting the lattice in the basket zone allows it to slip through and start to create that edge. And then here again, using the computer to find the types and the cuts that could be CNC'd out of these lattice pieces. and defining the number of parts. And then those pieces, come to the fab yard and are put in place, and ultimately start to create that definition. There again, going back to breaking down the scale of the space. And the other key element about the wood and the way it was used in this project, and I think going back to other airports, one of the challenging questions is, when you arrive at the airport, do you know where you are? Is it just this ubiquitous kind of white everywhere? Maybe that's appropriate for LA, where there's a lot of white reflective buildings, but how can you tell where you're at when you arrive? And we also asked ourselves, do you know where the wood is coming from? And this was another big hurdle. How could we start to track where the wood for the roof and other parts of the project is coming from? And through a series of small steps, we were actually able to track, as Jake mentioned in the video that was played earlier, that a lot of this wood was able to be tracked back to forest of origin. And really, the port wasn't looking for a sustainability trophy or certification. It really came about crafting sustainability that was appropriate for the place. And both from a sustainability, a carbon story, an ecology story, but also an economic story. The timber was a really special way to celebrate the work being done. A lot of these forests aren't necessarily FSC certified. They either can't afford it, or it's just it's not on the forefront of what they're doing, but yet they're actually going farther than FSC certification requires in some veins. And so I had the privilege of visiting the Skokomish tribes forest, was just what you see pictured here in the background. And they're taking a very dense monoculture forest and harvesting in a selective way to bring about the vibrancy of life in the forest that supports their values. And when I visited their forest, we went on a tour, and some of their local leaders were telling us about their forest practices. And then we were also having some sidebars, just talking about craft. And they mentioned how important basketry was to them. And this is one of the highlights of my career, is being there and realizing that here we are, that same day, harvesting the actual wood that would be used in the airport, and not just used in the airport, but used to create these light baskets. Being able to share with him that the wood you're providing is going to be part of these light baskets, and they thought there was a lot of poetry in that. And so what I want to kind of leave with here, or tell a bit of a story here at the end, is, as architects, I feel like one of our biggest challenges is, how do we get that intimate knowledge of a place if we haven't lived there? And about 20 years ago, I moved to Portland, and I had come from Arizona, the hot, intense sun of Arizona, and I took a drawing class at the university. And our first assignment was to sketch a scene, and then pin it up on the wall. And I sketched. I don't have that sketch, but I sketched a scene that might be kind of like this photograph, some sharp shadows. And the professor immediately said, "You're from Arizona, aren't you?" I said, "How did you know?" And he said, "Well, those aren't Oregon shadows. Those are Arizona shadows." And he was very correct. Oregon has really soft shadows, and in my kind of outdoor excursions and Yeah, I love photographing old ruinous buildings too, because I feel like they offer a lot. Oregon has a really soft light, and so um, that was an important lesson. So I think, understanding the quality of the light that the place that you're in, trying to immerse yourself in nature, understanding scale, what resources are available. This is from that Skokomish visit. Also looking to indigenous knowledge and vernacular evolution to know what can be done, but also how things can be done in a way that responds to the land. And then also looking to art and craft. And then also memories. If I could, when I start a new project, I would collect memories from people that have lived there for a really long time. And Lucy Lepard, in her book, defines the local as this intersection of nature, culture, history, and ideology. And she describes it as a geographical component of the psychological need to belong somewhere. And I'm ashamed to say that even though I had that early drawing lesson, it still took me about 10 years to really understand how much light exists on a cloudy day, and really appreciate that. And also these photos are from Silver Falls State Park here in Oregon. It's this incredible 7-mile walk that's got about 7 incredible waterfalls on it. And the waterfalls actually bring light down with them. And this was a key inspiration for this defining threshold between the room of the ticketing room and that Oregon market. We wanted to define that threshold with light. We also thought about defining it with a bit of water too, but of course that did not survive. But it was a way to bring that drama of the light into the space, and that whether it was a cloudy day or a sunny day, you could feel that pool of light inside this 9-acre terminal. So thank you, and I'll leave it there.
Wow, that is, I don't know if everyone can hear me and see me. I'm Steve Napier. That was completely mind-blowing. I've worked with a lot of architects here in Australia for a very long time, and we have definitely seen a shift, to being, yes, more sensitive to local place rather than just sort of, I guess, dumping a building, and, taking into account the local indigenous references and kind of including it within the design. But what I really love is, you've taken, typically, I think what we see abroad, something quite broad across architecture is kind of creating a building and then putting other surfaces onto it, whether it's, timber battens or lining it in any kind of other kind of materials. But you've actually integrated the structure and something like a beautiful like material, which is wood, and sort of blended those together, kind of intersected them. That's kind of mind-blowing.
No, thank you. I think architecture is at its finest when it's the structure. The structure is the form and the finish. And I forgot to mention that those lattice pieces actually form part of the lateral system to stabilize those beams.
Incredible. Talk to us a little bit about the relationship between Portland International Airport and ZGF Architects. You've been working together for about 6 decades, and yeah, you've also done a lot of expansions and upgrades and so forth. What actually led to this major expansion?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, ZGF has been working with the port for about 60 years. And we originally, for this project, we originally interviewed for a lobby renovation. And we brought a series of models kind of incrementally showing what could happen. And there was about almost 2 years spent on just ultimately defining what the project would be, because we won the interview, and then as things started to unfold, seismic issues, all of those buildings, kind of history of buildings, this conglomeration down below, it's kind of like starting to pull the string on the sweater, and ultimately they arrived at this solution. And building in place is not something to take lightly. I think that's why you see a lot of kind of leapfrogging with terminals. Oh, we'll add another terminal, add another terminal. And I think that's got to be one of the most agonizing stressors when you're a traveler, is which terminal do I have to get to?
So I think we've just lost Steve here. So forgive us, we've just lost Steve. So I'll jump in if you don't mind, Rena. He's on my face and my questions, if that's okay. Really interested in the relationship you have with the suppliers of said timber. You mentioned it about, especially in the video, and yourself with that map as well. Was that a specification from the client? And then also, kind of, how did you weave that into the stories? You also mentioned that you went and visited an indigenous culture there and Native American, but how much was that a specification?
It started first as a conversation. Just simply getting to wood required bringing in, you might call it a consultant contractor that was very familiar with building with wood to kind of help the greater team understand what building with wood meant. So that was the first hurdle. Then the next hurdle was bringing in a partner. In this case, it was Sustainable Northwest, that had a lot of these connections and had a way of thinking through, how can we break down this process where generally people don't want to identify where their wood is coming from. And I actually heard a really interesting perspective going back in time to the days of the owl protection, and how some of the timber people were getting death threats too. So there's a little bit of old history there that I think it's just a lot of different perspectives. And so I think a lot of it was just finding the right partners that had familiarity and had context to get the right conversations going. And so a lot of that was way before we were even done with SD. So we really hadn't gotten into the meat of our specifications yet, but getting that early procurement, and a lot of it too comes from a client who saw the tremendous value in supporting that, both from a carbon story and that kind of economical side.
And Steve is back.
My deepest apologies. My internet was absolutely fantastic for the last 2 hours and just decided to drop out at the very last second, but I found a new stream. There's just some really great audience questions here. One of them, Jose just asked, was the client open to using timber from the very beginning? Because it's always a big thing of cost and, something we haven't really done before.
Yeah, I would say certain people on the client side were open to it, but not everyone. And so a client like this isn't necessarily, you've got leadership that has a vision, but kind of like working with the government, they're like a 50-headed dog, you kind of have to bring everyone along. So there was a process there, but a lot of it came back to carbon really being a big when they saw the potential for that with the wood roof, that was big for them.
What tools were used to model the natural light within the space?
So I showed the photo of the heliodon, and maybe most folks know what that is, but it's basically a table that can rotate and be set on based on a longitude or latitude. Basically establish how the sun's going to move throughout the day. So that was a big tool. Also, other physical models that we did dealt a lot with tonality. And then our lighting designers did studies. It's funny, our lighting designers, as much as we talked about that with them about electric light, we also talked with them a lot about the tone of the wood and how Doug fir has a potential to age and get very dark and orange over time. And so we didn't want, with our daylight goals, that to diminish over time. So we actually used a really, really light whitewash. You can't even really tell, but it protected the wood during that fab yard phase. But then it also helps preserve that quality of light in the space.
Yes, no, absolutely amazing. I think a lot of people, don't understand that wood does change over time. And I've also done a lot of projects where you just, you put a coating on and it's just got a tint of something a little bit lighter just to hold that tone through for hopefully the life of the building. What is the timeline like for the project through all like the design phases? Like how long did
it's
that
actually
hold?
it's not finished. So I joined the project in 2016 when we were in the early concept phase, kind of defined what the project was. I think the original interview might have been back in 2011 or 2012. And then, the photos that you've seen, the final photography is from the kind of first phase opening. The second phase is slated for next year, and that will be basically the new location of the exit lanes. And then we've cut large circular openings into the baggage claim, the existing baggage down below to bring light in. So that will be done next year.
Oh, wow. That's absolutely incredible. I mean, I travel a lot and, I'm based in Sydney and we've got a lot of works going on there at the moment. And it's mind blowing to me how, once a month, different parts of the airport are sort of shifted around and the mechanics of and the level of organization is just mind blowing to me. You've got suppliers of, trades and materials and all that sort of thing coming. One very interesting and big question is the fire ratings. How did you achieve these fire ratings?
Yes. So the key thing there is to have all of the combustible material, all the wood, be 20 feet above the mezzanine. So any kind of occupiable surface, the roof needed to be 20 feet above that. And by doing that, we did not have to treat the wood. Also, from a sprinkler standpoint, that lattice is 70% open to allow the sprinklers above that lattice to reach the space below.
Oh, wow. Wow, extraordinary. And the plywood panels, how were these plywood panels fixed to the frame to allow for expansion and contraction with the different moisture levels in the atmosphere? Was there one picture on the top, the ply kind of looked like it was cupping or warping a little bit?
Oh yeah, and maybe they saw from the sand dune photo, just
Yes.
little subtleties in the wood there. I don't actually know specifically how we handled the expansion and contraction component. I can tell you what I did on my own roof when my husband and I re-roofed our own house. If you ever get the chance, pass. but when we installed new plywood, we, held an 1/8-inch gap there between the wood. But so I unfortunately I can't answer the question about that expansion. But I think the level, we weren't too worried about a little bit of nuance in that double curved surface because one, there's acoustic panels that are spaced up on the underside of that deck above the lattice. It also makes the airport pleasantly quiet. There's other things I can go on about that, but yeah, I guess I can't completely answer the question, but there was a lot of that mock-up work done that I think helps tremendously.
Yeah, it is interesting you talk about the noise because often you have an airport and they create like a base design and then they would have like acoustic panels hanging down or something to break up that solid space, but you've got this wood which would take up a certain amount of sound, but then the roof also has these breakings in it to allow that noise to actually float through, and this feeling in a forest as well, and it feels very very local. So it feels very very Oregon. What learnings occurred between the architectural computer modeler team and the timber fabrication and assembly team in the way of dimensions, tolerances, and connections?
Yeah, I know connections are a big deal. I mean, that's something they would do timed studies, like they would install a panel or a beam and then extrapolate that time over the hundreds and hundreds of times it needed to be done to really fine tune that. And then, I think that that mock-up that I showed for the mass plywood, there were also many other mock-ups. In the computer modeling, when we get information from what they were trying to do in the field with that warehouse mock-up, that could then be brought into the script to start to find the efficiencies in, just shaving one side of those mass plywood panels to anticipate when it folds down over the curve, what it's going to do.
Right. Okay. Do you have a permanent team dedicated to model making, or you just bring people in for certain projects?
We have in our Portland office, we have a few folks they live and breathe models, and that's all they do. But we really just try to create a culture of models. Actually, when folks are new to ZGF and first come to work with us, we purposefully have them work in the model shop for 2 weeks, just because there's a lot you can learn by working with your hands. And then myself personally in my design process use models all the time. This various bits and pieces hanging around here. But I find it a really great way to think. And so it's try to have everyone do some degree of model, but then there's certain, like for instance, for the airport, there was a 1/2-inch scale model that the port requested that we actually had to bring in another model making kind of fabrication group local to Portland to help build that because it was so big. But it's in the port headquarters now. But it's great. You can turn little lights on over the light baskets, and
One of my favorite things about visiting architecture studios, and there are some architecture studios, and I'm sure it's like this right around the world, where some are really into model making and craft, and there's something, I guess, in some ways it's a little bit of an old-fashioned process, but it somehow makes a project more human, I guess.
Yeah, well. And I think one thing kind of going back to that lattice, like defining the edge, I feel like there was a little bit of a computer mentality. I don't know if that's the right way to call it, but just thinking about everything needing to be on center. And,
Yes.
by shifting, and actually we didn't shift the lattice over one module. We just shifted it enough so that it would glide next to the adjacent piece of lattice. So it's not even in the middle. So it's technically asymmetrical, but I mean, it's 80 feet wide. You would never know. But it's kind of that loosening up that I think models help you do. Also
Yes.
kind of help you keep from getting
Absolutely.
too complicated too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were those real trees inside that
They
you
are.
used?
Yes, I think a lot of them are ficus trees. I want to say there's an olive type, but of course, when we started, like, oh, we'll have native, local landscape, but it's just it's a totally different climate inside a building. We would have to have a fog machine, probably indoors, to keep some of our Pacific Northwest plants alive. So a lot of those trees were grown down in Florida and then brought to the project because they can survive that indoor drier
Yeah.
environment.
Were there any issues in trying to mitigate the taxing aircraft noise transmission? How did you address that?
Noise transmission, as far as
So
I'm
yeah,
not entirely.
often. Yep.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. No. So when aircraft are taxiing and sort of outside, like, I guess, how did you handle all the outside noise within the
Well, I guess I
structure?
would say that it's handled through the glazing. And yeah, I don't know specifically if there was an STC type rating that we were required to meet, but you don't hear that, and you don't hear the takeoffs either. So I think just
Yes.
the makeup of the glazing, we had pretty thick panels of glass, and they're about 10-foot modules, so pretty large as well.
This is a real timber nerdy question, but did you discover regional differences in the source of the timber in terms of color and texture and fiber and that kind of thing, or was it?
There is, and I can't say just offhand exactly what creates that, but I know Doug fir that comes out of a plant south of Portland tends to be pinker and redder, and then I think there was different, get more yellows and different regions. So there is interesting subtleties there, and that's
Yeah.
kind of where the whitewash too kind of helped create a bit of cohesion.
So really, just in everything ZGF do is there really is such a thoughtful process beyond the technical solution to integrate beauty, materiality, and craft into, I guess, all the projects that you do. Can you talk us just a little bit through why this is so crucial to your design process?
Well, I think we're creating places for people. I think we're also creating places that connect us with nature. In my mind, architecture is a way of living with nature. I mean, obviously, as our civilizations have progressed, we've started to create more division between that. But I think it has to do with connection and going back to that lure of the local, feeling connected and feeling connected to landscape and each other.
It is really interesting in just seeing over time. I mean, this conversation has been around for a long time, talking about design and buildings being local, and within character. And now we're integrating what is local within architecture, but then also nature as well. And this sort of feeling of craftedness, if that is such a word, to make spaces feel more human. And I've noticed a bit of a trend here in making things not perfect as well, and it creates a feeling of humanness, I guess, as well, in a very turbulent world that we live in.
Yeah, yeah. And I thinking about an airport, you're basically surrounded by a sea of concrete with all of the taxiways and runways. And so in my mind, in this typology, it's probably the most in need of bringing that nature inside, because you are so detached from it.
Yeah. Just lastly, and just touching back on the operational side of things, what were the kind of key challenges you had, keeping the airport operational and on budget and delivering on time as well?
So those columns that I think you probably saw, the V columns in the renderings or the models and the photos. It took us a long time to find the right grid that just missed this baggage handling system. Or it's like, I think we ended up with just one or two columns that were rather costly to kind of thread the needle through. But we did ultimately find that kind of magic grid that just missed some of those critical systems down below.
Yeah, cool. I think that kind of brings us to the end of questions. There was actually this one last one just come through with regards to maintenance. Did the clients raise maintenance with timber for the interiors? I mean, I know from my experience there really is no maintenance when it comes to using timber interiors. How was this addressed?
So the wood was of course a conversation, but actually most of the maintenance conversation surrounded the trees, the live landscape coming in. And the client was basically just, they saw the value in it, and they did already have some trees just in pots in some of their concourses, so it wasn't totally foreign to them, but it was just kind of establishing the commitment from the beginning of that value. And so there's a service that they have that comes to maintenance the landscape, keep it healthy, and actually see maintenance as a key issue to the progression of our profession, and how the materials that we use, just if we can create a culture that's more celebratory about maintenance work, I think it would do so many things, not just for the beauty of our architecture, but the health of our bodies.
That's a really interesting point, and I should be finishing up right now. Just say that again about celebrating maintenance. So you mean to like embrace the concept?
Yeah, I mean it's treated as a or it's treated as a job that, let's have these folks work at night while the rest of us are asleep, and we're degrading their health, and at the same time we're devaluing the work that's being done. And it also leads to the approach of what I would call very sterile architecture the kind of
Yeah.
ubiquitous white. You walk in, and you can't tell where you are. Everything's very cleanable, but nobody wants to be there.
It's not human, is it?
Yeah,
It's really,
yeah.
really not human. It's a super interesting point, because we, especially commercial spaces, it's just seen as, oh, it's just a cost. Like, we don't want to do that design or use that type of material because it is just a cost and it's effort, instead of embracing and seeing it as being something that is beautiful and something to be proud of and something we can all take joy in. So we've taken the human aspect, in some ways joy,
Mhm.
and just looked at it as purely clinical, as functional and cost, and there's just no humanity in it, and it does affect our minds and our conscious, for
Definitely.
sure. Yeah, cool. Well, we're running slightly over time, so I'm going to hand back over to you, DK. Thank you so much for taking my barrage of questions. I really, really
Oh,
appreciate
for
it.
sure. Yeah, thank you, and thank you to all that joined today.
Well, thank you to both of you. Rena, thank you for the wonderful presentation and the provocation that you brought with all that. And for me, the big takeaways, I wrote down a bunch of notes. But for me, some stuff around like models as an artifact and letting the ideas linger. The idea of how do you know where you are when you create space. And then the last one for me, which I put an asterisk next to, regarding the quality of light, then drama can come from that. That's cool. I might borrow that sometime. Thank you also to Steve. Steve taking over the Q&A duties there, doing a wonderful job, especially with his deep knowledge around timber as part of the Abodo team. So thanks to both of you for your contributions here today. Really appreciate your time. And it leaves me to wrap up as well for the contributors, which is you, the attendees. So thank you for joining. The nearly 500 people who registered here today. This will be going out, and you'll, like I say, we'll follow up with a certificate of participation for your accreditation points. It's also the idea that there will be more. Abodo Presents will come back to you very soon, and in your inbox you will receive information about our future CPD opportunities as well, so you can continue these conversations. And I'm sure both Steve and Rena won't mind you reaching out to them, both on LinkedIn and other more professional platforms as well, to just follow up with conversations and further questions, and continue that learning and the sharing that we have here as part of the Abodo community. So thank you very much for your time today. We'll see you at the next Abodo Presents. Take care of yourself and other people around you, and we'll speak to you very, very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.